Greetings! In today's video, I want to take a look at this vintage Van Gogh palette. So it's their Watercolor Pocketbox Original special offer with 3 extra pans. We're familiar with this product in its current iteration, but this is a vintage set. So I'm really curious to compare the color layout, the paint itself, and the box, which, spoiler, is one of my favorite box designs. And yeah, I'm excited to try this out. Just a quick look at the packaging and the whole thing before I unwrap and swatch everything. So it came with this little booklet. It says handy watercoloring tips. So you have tips here in Dutch, English, French, and German, I think. And the guide, and then you have a small like tutorial in steps where they tell you how to paint a little landscape, looks like. For the sake of archival, I will probably scan this and put it up on my Patreon. I had never seen this little booklet before, so. And then the box itself. So this is what it looks like. As you can see, it's brand new, unused. Comes with the brush. It says Van Gogh 191 selected filament. It's supposed to be a size 3. Ah, there you go. Looks to be in great shape. And this is the colors we get. The 3 extra colors are just put in the area they usually keep for the sponge. So here we get these 3 extras in there. And I will proceed to unwrap everything, prepare a swatching sheet, and swatch these. And then we'll come back to the palette with swatches and impressions and talk about what I think of this particular palette. And I am back with my finish spread featuring these paints. So this is what the palette looks like now. As you can see, I've used it substantially. I painted this spread in my sketchbook to feature the paints with the swatches and all that, but I also painted a bunch of extra little character sketches or drawings with those paints, so my impressions are based on all of these paintings. Overall, I really like these paints, so that's my main takeaway. These are really nice paints, very easy to use, very easy to re-wet. They mix well. They really gave me the colors I wanted, mostly. Now, the color palette of this vintage set is a bit different from the modern version of the same set. There are 5 colors that are different. In the modern version, you get a cerulean blue phthalo, a sap green, a quinacridone rose, a Prussian blue, and a burnt umber, instead of the gamboge, orange permanent, permanent green, permanent blue violet, and the cobalt blue ultramarine. On its own, this palette is a little bit limited because you don't really have a bright magenta in there. You have a cool red in the Madder Lake Deep, which is quite serviceable, but it's not a magenta. Also, you don't really get a cool blue in this set. The cobalt blue ultramarine and the ultramarine deep are fairly similar, so that's where this palette is lacking perhaps a tiny bit if we are aiming at getting the most versatile palette possible. I quite enjoyed getting a convenience purple in this palette, which you don't get in the modern version. I feel like that's a very useful color in mixes and a fairly useful color on its own. I also quite enjoy the convenience orange that you also don't get in the modern version of this palette. The white is not the most opaque white, which is to be expected. It's a Chinese white. Of the 2 white pigments that we see the most, this one is PW4, and it's usually the more transparent of the 2. I don't find white very useful in my mixes, but I kind of like to use it at the end of a painting to add some subtle variations in the hue and temperature of the colors, because if you add it on top of paint, it will cool down the color that's underneath and also make it lighter. You can see it kind of on the sword, and all the metal bits is where I used it the most, but I also used it on the rocks here. Looking at the palette itself, it's a bit difficult to see which colors I've used the most. I've used a fairly bit of most of them. From memory, I think the ones I went for the most were the Madder Lake Deep here, the Yellow Ochre, the Payne's Gray, the Orange, the Burnt Sienna, and the Permanent Blue Violet. But yeah, all the colors you can see are a bit dirty, which means I've picked them up, all of them at some point. You might be wondering what's the whole point of featuring this palette in a video. It's a vintage set. This specific palette, Van Gogh, they've changed their palette design, they've changed their color layout, they've even changed the brush. So what's really the point of talking about this? Well, first of all, I want to bring your attention to the design of this palette, because it is one of my favorite palette designs. And you can still get it. I'll come back to this a bit later, but what I really like of this palette is this feature. You can just remove the lid, and that means you can easily wash it, rinse it, dry it. It makes this palette so easy to use and easy to travel with, in my opinion. It's also really compact. It's not that thick, as you can see. You can easily remove the pans by poking them through the holes in the bottom. I don't think generic sized pans fit in this set, so you kind of have to go with smaller pans or straight up go for Van Gogh pans. I think in terms of student range watercolor, Van Gogh is a really nice option. They are affordable, they are good paint, they work really well. I really have no issue with them. Like, the color payoff is there, the pigment info is there, you know what you're getting, they work well, they re-wet well, really no issue with them at all. Now, this palette has been repurposed by the manufacturer, this design I mean. They now have it in their beginner range of paint. I'll have pictures on the screen. It's basically the same idea, but they don't hold the Van Gogh watercolors anymore. They've put some really beginner paints in the set. Now, I've painted with those beginner paints in the past. They're quite serviceable, they're quite nice. But if you want the palette, just for the palette, you kind of have to buy that set and either remove the paints from the pans or just remove the pans altogether and put in new pans that fit. The set holds 12 colors, and usually here you have kind of a sponge. In this case, for the 15 color set, they just put the pans in there. They're quite well stuck in there now. Anyway, and I'm fine with it. The brush is also different in its design. The more modern ones have a different end here at the handle so that you can use it as leverage to pop open the lid of the new sets. The new sets, they still have a removable mixing lid, but it's sort of more like an insert that you put in the lid of the palette. I feel like the more modern boxes are more bulky. I don't like them as much as this one, personally. So this brush is quite serviceable. I've used it for a lot of the paintings, not the biggest areas of my paintings, but for everything smaller and all the details, I use this brush. It worked perfectly well. The only issue I had with it is that it would sometimes become like separate itself. Now, of course, it doesn't want to collaborate with me, but I would be painting, and I guess through the repeated action of painting and rinsing and shaking the brush, this part would just separate. You just got to clip it back together. It's not really an issue, but it's surprising when half of your brush fall down on your painting while you're painting. So something to be careful of. Overall, what are my impressions of testing this set out? A couple of main things. First of all, it's interesting to see that the Van Gogh quality is still there. From testing these paints to my experience using more recently made Van Gogh paints, they all work really well. I feel like this is a really good brand for a travel set that is not too precious for someone who is starting but doesn't want to pay like a super heavy price for a palette. This is a really affordable option, and also sometimes it's more available than other good student paints. I know that the Schminke Academy paints are really nice, but they're kind of hard to find, while Van Gogh is much easier to find. As you already know, I'm a big fan of this design, so to be able to score this vintage set was really, really nice for me. If you feel like you really want to try this palette design, I'll have the links to the modern version of it, in the sense that this design that has been reused for a different product, and also I'll have links to the modern version of the Van Gogh set. Now you can find it in all sorts of declinations. They have themed palettes, they have colorful palettes, in the sense that they have a special Van Gogh palette where the plastic casing is orange. So you get a lot more customization available now for your palette, which is great, which is fun. I've played with these new sets in the past, but yeah, in general, I don't think I've ever had a bad experience with Van Gogh paints. So in that sense, I would recommend just checking these out anyway, if you feel like they would be interesting to you. I hope this video was interesting. I hope you enjoyed watching it, hopefully. And I thank you a lot for taking the time to watch it. I will be back as soon as possible with a new video, and in the meantime, I hope you have a great time painting, and see ya all in the next one. Bye bye!